Welcome everyone. We are going to give just a little bit of time for attendees to show up. I am Anna Brown from Katie Budget Books. I'm going to be the host this evening. I'm just going to give you some store news while we're waiting for everyone to file in. So we are so grateful to be able to have this option during a time when we are not having events in store. And we have been so grateful for all the support for our virtual event programming. And in a lot of ways, we're able to have events like this that we wouldn't necessarily be able to have if it was in-person touring. We can't necessarily get all these authors together. So it's actually been really awesome in a lot of ways to be doing these virtual events. And we are going to make our parenting panels a monthly event. We are finalizing the date on our October one. So those of you that are local and are looking for some parenting advice or just community, we are going to be working on that going forward, trying to have a monthly virtual panel, because we know that's a lot easier for parents even during normal times than trying to take a night off from the kids to get out and do stuff. So we are super excited to have this as an option. And we are super grateful that you guys are joining us. We also have some other author signing events with signed books of fiction. So please feel free to look at our upcoming event schedule on our website because we're very excited about all of our virtual programming. I am just particularly pleased about this event because I happen to be a mother of 3 boys spanning from 17 to 18 months. And so I need all the parenting assistance I can get. I am particularly pleased about this specific panel because right now the world is changing a lot. And I know that I, as a mother, felt like when COVID started, the world was in total upheaval and I just wanted things to get back to normal. But things are still not back to normal, and we are in a much better place with the pandemic, at least where we are at. But things are still kind of changing, and that just is what it is. But what I've discovered is that some things I don't necessarily want to go back to normal. There were some things about how I was caring for myself and my children that has changed during the pandemic while the world has been changing that maybe I kind of want to hold on to. So I really love these authors and these books for exactly that reason, that they all kind of cover things that maybe we've been looking at more closely as the world has been changing than we would under ordinary circumstances, with some intentionality, so we can really look at what we want to hold on to as things start to reopen and maybe get back to normal. So I am thrilled to have 4 phenomenal authors with us tonight. I'm just going to briefly say who they are and then introduce each of them in more detail as it's their turn to speak. We have Jenn Curtis, Cynthia Muchnick, Pam Lobley, and Dr. Claire Nicosian here with us. I knew I was going to mess that up. I'm sorry, Dr. Claire. Who have all worked on books that deal with very different aspects of parenting. So I'm excited for them all to get a chance to speak to you tonight. And we are going to start with Pam Lobley. So I'm going to tell you a little bit more about her before she starts speaking. So Pam is an author and humor columnist. She has written about parenting and family life for many national news outlets. Her memoir that she's here for tonight, Why Can't We Just Play What I Did When I Realized My Kids Were Way Too Busy, is the tender and hilarious story of a summer she spent slowing down and doing nothing with her kids. She is a strong advocate for slowing down family life and getting more play into children's lives. And she's the mother of 2 sons. So Pam, we're so grateful you're here.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you so much for having me. You're right that if it weren't for the pandemic, I wouldn't be able to come to Katie Budget Books. So this is great. Okay, so I'll tell you a little bit about how this book came about. So it's the summer of 2008, so it takes place a while ago. And my 2 boys at the time were 7 and 10. And we were running around doing that whole typical busy family life thing that everybody does. They were in grade school, but they had homework, and they did soccer and karate and wrestling, and I gave them piano lessons, and I'm sure you know the drill. We were massively busy, but it seemed fine. Everybody was doing the same thing. All us parents were doing the same thing, until one night my son Sam, who was 10 at the time, just broke down in tears at bedtime. And he said, "I never have time to just play." And I thought to myself, what are you talking about? We just got back from soccer and there was a birthday party and you got to, play on the sidelines of your brother's baseball game. But all that stuff was not play to him. Play to him was, I dump the toys out in the living room and do what I want for an hour and a half. Or I have a friend over and we goof around in the backyard and mom doesn't bother us. Play for him was independent, self-directed, free stuff where you could get the giggles or be crazy and no one would tell you to follow the rules or be quiet or whatever. And I didn't realize it, but there was almost no free play in his life. So I started thinking about our lives and thinking about what could I do differently. And the summer was upon us. So I said, all right, this is great. We're going to have a do nothing summer. So instead of doing the typical, day camps and sport camps and enrichment, all the different things that we do every summer to keep our kids busy, we did nothing. The only thing I did was I joined the town pool, which we have a town pool, which was great because we could just go and swim. But our days were completely free. And at the time I was writing a newspaper column. So I was working at home. So here I was working at home. My kids were home all the time with nowhere to go and a lot of free time. Sound like something we've all been living through lately? So when I talk about my book tonight, I want to share with you some of the things I learned from that summer, which there were many, and how we can maybe bring them into the crazy time that we're living in now to really enrich and enhance our own lives. So the first thing that I learned, obviously, is the importance of free play in our kids' lives. And I don't know if any of you parents out there have realized this, but the kids' schedules and the schools too are just squeezing free play right out of their lives. I mean, recess alone, I know districts near me where they just canceled recess because it's too, quote, dangerous, or there's not room in the schedule, or all these other things. The district that I'm in now, recess is 22 minutes long. And these poor kids are bursting at the seams. And then in the wintertime, we just have indoor recess and they're not allowed to run around. They go to the gym and they bring a coloring book. It's torture. But anyway, they really need free play. And if you need any more evidence of this, a couple of years ago, the American Academy for Pediatrics actually started writing prescriptions to parents. Play, like the little notepad that you write the antibiotics on, they would write, play a certain number of hours a day and hand it to the parents to emphasize to them, you should not be putting your kids into all these scheduled activities. They have got to have free play, and a lot of free play, a whole Saturday, afternoons after school, the whole routine. So as I watched my kids have all this free play, I could really see a difference in them. I saw them be less stressed and more relaxed. Yes, it was a challenge to get them to see their friends because activities is how you saw your friends. So I did have to schedule a lot of play dates, but then I would just get out of their way and let them do whatever they wanted outside of the playground, or if we were at the town pool or in their backyard. So I think that free play is, if you look at any study, by any study, it talks about how important that type of play is for a kid's development. It lets them use their imagination and develop independence and develop knowledge of their self-knowledge of their own choices and creativity. And they have to problem solve, because when they're playing with kids and there's no adults around, there's all those bickering fights of, I said he was out, and you said he was safe, and I want to be the mom and you be the baby when we play house, and all those rules that they fight over. That's a huge life skill that they're working on, that they're not working on when moms and coaches and teachers are constantly telling them, okay, it's your turn. Now we do it this way. Now we all did it together and now we're all done. So free play was the most exciting sort of revelation from that summer. The second thing I learned was, and this is going to sound crazy, how little I knew my kids, because we were just following this template where we went to all these activities and I was busy working and we rushed through dinner and then it was time for the bath. And I felt like those lazy days or those days of reading stories together like you have when they're 3 years old had disappeared. And even though I was home with my kids, I kind of felt like I was missing their childhood. So by really slowing down and having like not enough to do and watching them get bored, and then watching them in their boredom make a choice, like, would they rather sketch? Would they rather color? Would they rather pick on their brother? Do they want to grab drumsticks and drum on their pillows? Watching the choices they made was very educational to me about who they were, watching how they dealt with each other, just seeing how they existed day to day. I had the time to pay attention, and it really helped me to get to know them individually, their temperaments and their talents, which was huge as they grew older. Because as they grew into middle school and high school, and stress becomes intense and choices are made about, you know, courses and all that type of thing, the more I knew about them, the more I could help them individually chart their course, as opposed to, once again, back to the sort of same thing that everybody does. And it also helped me to understand their strengths and weaknesses. So for instance, they really never liked to read. And I know that's like the cardinal sin of parenting. We're all trying to raise readers. Everybody has to love reading. We all need to love reading. And I love reading, and I'm a writer, and they don't like to read. But once I just was able to accept that and say, well, you know what? They're really good at a lot of other things, and they love a lot of other things, and that's okay. So that type of knowledge and acceptance came from having that much time to really pay attention and be okay with that. The third thing I learned was that it's so important to shut out all the noise and follow my own path, because nobody else that summer was doing nothing with their kids. Even my good friends, they were nice to me and supportive of me, but believe me, no way on earth were they going to do it also. They thought it was nuts. So I had to really like get to that place where I could say, okay, maybe it's not right for most other people, but for my family, it's the right decision. And I see how my kids are, and I know that it's the right decision. And so now I think in this pandemic, there's so much that's different that we have to make more decisions, right? I was so overwhelmed with decisions all the time. Should I let him do this activity? Are we going back to school? What are we doing? Is it safe? She's doing this, he's doing that. It's so overwhelming. But the more you can really pay attention to your own child and your own family, and then shut out the noise. If I have to see one more Instagram post of everybody's perfect little homeschool setup with the perfect little seats and the little decorations, my kids would have destroyed that in 5 minutes. So all this pressure to be a certain way, we don't have to say yes to that. If we can be secure in, you know, we know who our kids are and we're doing the right thing for them, it's a lot easier to say, okay, great, that cute setup works for somebody else, but it doesn't work for me. So I would say those were the biggest lessons I learned from that summer. And I think that, I hope that there are things that we can all kind of take with us now in this really crazy time.
Thank you so much, Pam.
You're welcome.
And attendees, I should have mentioned at the beginning, and I am so sorry for the oversight. We're in webinar, which means we can't see or hear you guys, which you've probably picked up on by now, but there is a Q&A box at the bottom, and we are going to do a Q&A at the end. So at any point, if a question comes into your mind, just go ahead and type it into the Q&A box, and we'll address it at the end if it's for one of the authors in particular, if you'll just kind of note that. So sorry. I always forget something, admin.
I just forgot something. I wanted to add one more thing, which is this. As stressful as this time is, you know, when I was doing my summer, I knew when it was going to end. It was ending on Labor Day and they were going back to school. So it gave me that sense of, this is a singular, cherished time. And even if they're driving me crazy, I'm going to find the silver linings. I'm going to look for all the best that I can, because I know this time will never come again. And even though this pandemic is stretching on so much longer than anybody ever thought, if there's still a way to think like this will be a singular moment in our families' lives, and there's got to be some silver linings and some beauty that we can find and really hang on to. And I think you'll be surprised how much your children will look back on this time and love it. And I bet you they love having you around more than they could ever say. So that's something to hang on to when you think you might be losing it.
That's true. And it's one of the things I loved most about your book, Pam, was that that's sort of been our experience in my family, is that And me and my husband have actually both kept working full time this whole time. It was out of our homes for a while, but we were both working full time, which I know is a blessing. A lot of families didn't have that. But that we are just we don't have the option when the boys start making us crazy to take them to the play place to find other kids right now, right? And so we've had to learn as a family how to work those things out all together, how to let the little ones kind of work it out by themselves as much as they can at this age. They're still very small. But that's one of the things that motivated me to do this, is that then it feels like as things begin to reopen, there's that expectation that things will just go back to how they were. And I actually am really cherishing that our family has changed in the ways that it has. So I was so grateful to read your book and feel like I'm not alone in that.
Thank you.
All right. So next I'm going to introduce Dr. Claire for a little something different. Thank you so much, Pam. She will still be here for questions at the end, everyone.
Yes.
Okay, so Dr. Claire Nicosian is a licensed clinical psychologist and a clinical instructor of psychiatry and human behavior at Brown University. She's the founder of momswellbeing.com, where you can find her writing and the podcast In Session with Dr. Claire. Her writing has appeared across the parent internet, including on Motherly and HuffPost. Dr. Claire lives in Rhode Island with her husband and 4 daughters, who are currently twin seniors, a middle schooler, and an elementary student. So she kind of covers the full spectrum of parenting, different ages. Dr. Claire is here tonight for, out of here, Mama, You Are Enough.
Thank you so much for having me. So excited to be part of this panel too. And you know, as you read that, I almost wish, Anna, you could read that like every couple of hours to my family, because it makes me feel so accomplished, like, and respected, because I think a lot of us parents right now are struggling with that, because we're carrying many roles and wearing many hats, and we're always available to our kids, and it feels really overwhelming. So thank you for that little mini joy there, just to remember some of the things I've actually finished at the end of the day. So thank you. And I really relate a lot to what, you know, Pam, you were saying about playing. And I think as a clinical psychologist and mom, you know, when we're so focused on how we structure our time, then when it's unstructured, we're really at a loss with how to fill it. So I think one of the greatest maybe silver linings of having to have our routines, you know, so dramatically changes, we have to reacquaint ourselves with what we're going to do when we don't have those other things we normally would do. And as a clinical psychologist, you know, since, you know, I'm in private practice, and again, I have 4 daughters, what I've seen is that clients and people and myself, the coping skills we usually had, we don't have anymore. We're not available, we're not able to see people or travel or do things or go about the world the way we used to. So it's really challenging as a psychologist when I in the therapy room, or thinking of what I could do, or helping my kids, or talking with friends, like the things we normally say to do to take care of ourselves are almost impossible to do. And I was just on a walk before this event after school with the kids and with some friends, and socially distanced, and we were saying, like, we're wearing so many hats that our stress levels are off the charts. And I really hope, Pam, that is my wish, that like we look back and our kids say that was great, because I feel like what I'm seeing, and again, it's mental health, so it's different, but I'm seeing people like trying to just get through the day. And I see so much parenting guilt, because mainly mothers are feeling the burden of it. They're feeling the burden of, I'm failing at work, I'm failing with my kids, I can't help them successful at school, I'm feeling so overwhelmed. And so I just feel like that's in the trenches right now for so many parents. And I really hope, my gosh, I hope that that's true, that kids look back and say that was a good time, because that would be great, because it would take away some mom guilt, which is a perfect segue into a little bit about my book, Mama, You Are Enough, How to Create Calm, Joy, and Confidence Within the Chaos of Motherhood. And I wrote this book because as a mom of 4 and psychologist with 20 years of experience in the therapy room, what I was noticing is we weren't having authentic conversations about our feelings. And women and men, parents would come into my therapy office and would say, I've got some really scary things to talk about. Like, I don't want to be around my kids. I don't enjoy playing with them. I mean, talk about a taboo. Like, I can't stand the bedtime routine. Can't stand it. Like, I dread it because it's a battle. And so I started looking at these narratives and stories and noticed a theme that these women weren't alone. These dads weren't alone. I wasn't alone. My friends weren't alone. And so I wrote a book all about the really challenging moments in motherhood. And I intentionally don't label feeling. I do not label feelings as good or bad. I just label them as neutral. And so in the book, it's all about what I call the shadow emotions of motherhood. And the main emotions are fear and anxiety, sadness, anger, embarrassment, and disgust, and all the variations in between. So I want you to think of this book as like an emotional literacy. It's going to take you, it's going to be your roadmap through motherhood on all those emotions that you're going to be nodding your head and saying, I'm not alone. I'm not alone. Thank goodness I'm not alone. And one of the biggest messages in my book is just because you have these feelings doesn't mean it is reflective on how you're doing as a parent. And I think that's really important because just like Pam was talking about, you know, we can get so caught up in what our Instagram or social media feeds look like in terms of what's perfect. But if we're suffering inside and not dealing with our emotions, then we're really taking away from being in the moment with our kids. So I saw this huge gap and wanted an authentic conversation. So I wrote the book that I needed. And the book, really, I wrote it with intention as a busy mom, because I don't know how you are in your life, but I don't have time to sit and read for an hour. I may be reading something related to my kids' hybrid schedule of when they're going in different times. That's what I'm reading and rereading. So I designed this book to really be a little bit about self-care, and then like as a foundation, what parents need, and then how to take care of your emotions. So you could pick the book up at any point and read a chapter on guilt. You're going to read a narrative that talks about like you're not alone, how to reframe your thoughts, how to take those shadow moments and turn them into something either neutral or a little more balanced. So we're not creating this self-critical voice, is really what you're going to find in the book. So that's a little overview on that. I don't know if anyone has any questions on that, but it's so near and dear to my heart.
And I did really appreciate that about your book, that it wasn't you have to sit down and read from beginning to end, because we don't have time to do that all the time. Although I did mostly read it beginning to end because it was fascinating. And it was so nice to not feel alone about that stuff. I love that every chapter has a "you are not alone" story in it. Because I feel like those are the sorts of things. I remember sitting down one night with my husband and talking about the bedtime battle, and how I end up angry and yelling and feel terrible about it, but it's just so frustrating. And he looked at me like I was kind of a monster, which is kind of the reaction you get from a lot of people when you say things that aren't just "I love my children and everything about them," right? Which like everybody has things about family life that's frustrating. But it gets really easy with all that mom guilt to feel like it's just you.
Right. And I give you so much credit for being brave in that moment to say to your husband, listen, I'm dreading this. And I think for any partner or spouse, you know, out there listening, is that's the moment where I think it's so important to say, I don't feel that way, but help me to understand why you do. Help me to understand your experience, because I've noticed that too. Like, what I will feel guilty for would never cross my husband's radar. And sometimes I'm like, oh my gosh, like you missed that whatever. And he's like, oh, but I had work, or I had this, and in my mind, I'm like, I need to take a page out of his playbook. Like that I hold myself to these standards, that he doesn't have the guilt that I have. Right? Like I have the guilt in so many ways, and I relate to what you're saying, that I think is just to support each other, that it may not be their experience, but it was yours in the moment, right? And that was see, this is what's important about shadow emotions, is that when we give space in the right ways, and I'm not saying your husband was wrong, but like, let's say you had shared, you like open up the book and say, okay, here, I'm feeling guilt about the bedtime routine. I know you don't understand that. Here, read this chapter. I wonder what his reaction would be, because he would never have seen it that way.
That's true.
And so I think if we could just talk about it more, we find solutions on how to just understand what we're going through. And one of the favorite things I say in my home to my daughters and my husband, that's kind of like one of our family mantras, it is absolutely okay to have a feeling, from, joy to sadness to frustration to anger to rage to, feeling hopeless. What you do about it is the difference. So we can have a feeling and choose how to respond. And if you're not taking care of yourself and you're running on empty, and there's a whole chapter on burnout and exhaustion, then what's going to happen is you're coming from a place of reactivity instead of responding. And so that's really kind of the foundation of my book, is allowing yourself to understand your emotions and your shadow emotions and not judge them, just hold them with compassion, and then look to understand what's going on underneath and what you can do about it. Because I guarantee all the moms listening and dads, you coach your son or daughter through so much right now. We need to coach ourselves. Like, we need to be that kind inner voice that's coaching us through these really challenging, unprecedented parenting times. And so that's a lot of what you're going to find on my book, as well as on my site, Mom's Wellbeing, and on Instagram at Mom's Wellbeing, and Facebook, where I write all about these topics and have some great free downloadable resources that you can find in the book, but I have them free even if you don't purchase the book. Just sign up for my newsletter and you get these great downloads on how to do self-care and manage some of your emotions.
And then one of the other things I felt was really important about your book is that you talk a little bit about the difference between self-care and self-pampering, because I know what we see on social media when people talk about self-care is like taking a long bubble bath or like going on a shopping spree. And that right now, with everything being in so much upheaval, those things can feel really good in the moment, but aren't really that foundation of like long-term actual caring for yourself. Can you speak to that for a minute?
Sure. And being mindful of the time for the other panelists, I'll do a quick summary, and then if anyone wants to ask more questions. Yeah, so from a psychologist standpoint, self-care are the sustainable behaviors, everyday activities that help you reduce your stress and improve your well-being. So self-pampering, a manicure, a massage, being indulgent and binge watching Netflix when the house is quiet, eating chocolate cake. Those are self-pampering, self-indulgence. Those are really important parts of self-care, but that's not going to help you when your toddler is having a total tantrum at the checkout line, when your teenager has slammed the door and is rolling their eyes. You're not going to look down and say, I've got the best manicure right now. You're just not. Like, that's not going to help you in the moment. You're going to be feeling something. And so what I always say is that self-care starts with the foundation of sleep, getting as much as you need for your own physical health, and then staying hydrated. And, as Jen's drinking water, I love that, because got to stay hydrated, and, eating nutritious food. That's the foundation. And if that's all the self-care you're doing right now and moving your body, that's really good right now in COVID. And then the other layer, once you have a good physical self-care, is to add in the emotional self-care. And that's all those strategies in the book, as well as all those resources I talked about. So that's what I would say in a quick 90 seconds, still staying on time.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Dr. Claire. I am going to introduce our next two authors. Dr. Claire will still be here for Q&A at the end. Again, if you have any questions while you're thinking of them, go ahead and type them in the Q&A box and we'll get to them at the end. So our next two authors wrote a book together, The Parent Compass. It's Cynthia Muchnick and Jenn Curtis. So I'm going to tell you a little about both of them together because they're going to discuss together. So Cynthia Muchnick has been working in education for the past 25 years as a former assistant director of college admission, high school teacher, educational consultant, and author of 5 other education-related books. She speaks professionally to parents, students, teachers, and businesses on topics such as study skills, the adolescent journey, college admission, and now the Parent Compass movement. She is the parent of 4, a college graduate, college student, high schooler, and middle schooler. And Jenn Curtis is an educational consultant and professional speaker. As owner of FutureWise Consulting, she has worked with hundreds of students on every aspect of the college admission process. She is particularly passionate about empowering teens to approach life with intention and educating parents about using their parent compass. She is the mother of 2 young daughters. So ladies, thanks so much for joining us this evening.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much. So we're going to talk a little bit about why we wrote this book. About 18 months ago, almost to the day, Operation Varsity Blues, which is also known as the college admissions scandal, erupted. Cindy and I immediately jumped on our phones and talked for what felt like the whole morning, kind of lamenting on what we were seeing going down in the media. But what Operation Varsity Blues did spark was a series of conversations between the 2 of us as we worked through kind of that anger that we were feeling. And while we unpacked it, we started to focus our observations, but focus on talking about our observations that we had been making in recent years. And those observations had to do with parenting behavior. We were noticing positive parenting behavior, and we were noticing some devastating poor parenting behavior, which was resulting in these kids who were over and over again coming into our offices who had little to no voice, had little passion. They were kind of universally showing signs of burnout. They didn't have a lot of initiative, and frankly, they seemed unhappy and had fractured relationships with their parents. At the same time, we'd also been noticing parenting behaviors that seemed to help result in happy, thriving, well-adjusted teens who had positive parenting relationships. And then there were those parents who kind of seemed stuck in the middle, where they were well-intentioned, but they didn't know how best to support their teens while everyone around them seemed to be over-parenting and snow plowing and helicoptering. And so we felt compelled to get this message out. So we wrote the Parent Compass to help parents understand their appropriate role in navigating the tween and teen years amidst a competitive academic environment. So in the Parent Compass, we talk about a variety of things. We talk about helping kids develop resilience and grit and intention. We talk about the value of letting our kids fail and working through those failures with them. We give suggestions for navigating the complicated realm of technology and screen time. We talk about the importance of family dinner and helping our kids to develop positive study skills. We talk about focusing on the journey as opposed to focusing on the destination, and about raising tweens and teens with intention. And we challenge parents to really take a good hard look at why they parent the way that they do, with the biases they have, and sometimes that resulting in some skewed priorities. Our goal with this book, The Parent Compass, was to start what we feel is a quintessentially important conversation to be having, and also to help parents keep their relationship with their children intact?
So I'll just thank you, Jen, for the wonderful summary of the last 18 months of our work together. I'll start actually my little addition to the book with the quote that we open our book with, which is the quote that says, "Adolescence is a period of rapid changes. Between the ages of 13 and 17, a parent can age as much as 20 years." And that quote was on my refrigerator growing up. I have two older sisters, so we had a house full of girls just like Claire. And I didn't really know what that quote meant until I myself started working with teens and then became a parent of teens. And when we wrote this book to try to help educate parents, this population, on ways to preserve this important relationship during these years that are particularly difficult. We wrote it really when Varsity Blues came out. That was the catalyst. That was the reason that suddenly Jen and I said, we need to step in and do something to help. But then COVID-19 hit, and the book took on even a bigger kind of purpose, and I guess I would say audience, when we are at home and participating in many of the things that Claire also discussed with our kids. We need a toolbox to help us, lengthen our fuses, because our fuses are extra short, and some roadmap to help us better navigate these extra challenges that we're also facing. So we feel really excited that the content has more than just a purpose of parent behavior, in general, but really parent behavior more than ever right now, when we are looking for answers to provide more clarity on how to, help support our teens when we ourselves could use some extra support too. So we're really excited that, to share what the book talks about. And I think I'll turn it back to Jen for a little more, and then a little more back to me.
So as we're forging into this new school year, many of us parents are facing, we are all facing some inevitable uncertainty, but in particular, so many parents are. And alongside our uncertainty, we have to be making some really difficult decisions right now. Decisions that used to be small decisions have now kind of ballooned in their significance. And alongside those decisions comes a lot of doubt. So we feel like the message of the Parent Compass really has never been more critical. Recognizing our children for who they are, refraining from talking for them so that we can instead empower them to speak out, refraining from fixing their problems. These things seem to have become all the more applicable now, when children really need to know that they have a voice and that it's valued and that it matters. So I want to take a second to touch on one of the chapters in the Parent Compass, because I think it's especially pertinent to our conversation here, talking about parenting during COVID. One of the chapters is about rankings. And I think we have become a culture that has become hyper obsessed with name brand schools, which is in part a result of the annual college rankings, like the ones put out on the US News and World Report, which is what we focus primarily on. And in the Parent Compass, we talk about the many flaws that are inherent in the algorithms. Rankings lists generally don't address student debt. They don't talk about the presence of mentors on campus, which is a really important aspect of a student's education. Research tells us that. And we don't talk, they don't take into consideration the fit for that student. And rather they rely on proxies to address their their data. And so this is a year where we're really likely to see some really surprising and unpredictable results in terms of admission, and I think more so in years past. And so as parents, I think this year, more than any other, we can really do our kids a favor by focusing on fit during their college search, fit that socially, academically, the qualities that are going to help them thrive on a college campus, as opposed to focusing solely on those names that we've heard of. And I think we can be open to schools that we haven't yet heard of in search of that fit. Cindy, do you have anything to say?
Well, so that's a chapter that we go into greater depth that I would definitely encourage any parent who is obsessed with rankings or not obsessed with rankings to read, to learn a little bit more. The chapter that I wanted to also mention, which I think is particularly important right now, would be our final chapter where we talk about alternative routes to college. Not every high school student is ready to go to college or wants to go to a four-year college when they finish high school. Some want to join the military. Some want to go to trade school or, learn a craft or a skill. Some are prepared for a community college for a couple of years before transferring into a four-year college. And others, like actually my very own son, are taking a leave of absence this year, which was a really big decision. I have a college student who decided that his spring of his freshman year, this online schooling was a drag. And the idea of continuing his sophomore year of college fully online, or for half of the year online, just sounded like a dreadful way. He wanted real professors and he wanted to be in the college academic experience that he'd signed up for. So we had a long family discussion, and he was very clear that he had a summer paid internship and asked them if he could continue into the fall and through the school year, and they were happy to keep him on. So he moved back to his college setting to live with some college friends and is working and spending the year doing that, and looking at his other roommates who are in online school who are pretty unhappy. And he feels really good about that decision. And so as a family, we had to pivot and had to support our son who, frankly, all of our kids are being robbed of something right now. They're being robbed of experiences that they've all expected and that they all, want and deserve. And we as adults had the opportunity to live through this stage of life. I think it's hard on us in different ways, but in these critical years where kids want socialization and they want to grow around friends and they want to build relationships with professors and teachers and they want to do it in a face-to-face way, some kids are just choosing alternate routes. So I would encourage parents to use the word of acceptance and flexibility a lot in their vocabulary this coming year. Things may pivot mid-term. Things may pivot. Kids may start coming home or stop their on-campus situation or resume an on-campus situation. There's just so many unknowns right now that we have to be flexible, and we have to give ourselves a break as parents to look at our kids, as best we can and support the choices that, they're making for themselves, and we're trying to help them make as they navigate these tricky years. So that would be sort of some of my thoughts. We might have another minute or two, Jen, if there's anything else you want to address with our book, or we can, can open it up to questions as well. I guess maybe if I was going to add one more little thing, going back to Pam's concept of play, we have a chapter in the book that focuses on family dinners and those kinds of things, which more than ever, we're having more of them now. And there is a concept called playtime, downtime, family time that we have, borrowed from Challenge Success, which is an organization that helps high schools become more reasonable for students. It tries to de-stress the high school experience, and they go around to all these schools. So if you're not a Challenge Success school, I would look into it. But this playtime, downtime, family time breaks into 3 parts. And the play, other than, little kids playing on the floor, big kids need their version of play. And if it's through playing a video game with a friend somewhere else, or a socially distant backyard visit, or what my daughter had, which we pitched our first tent in the backyard, and her friend pitched a tent from their house 10 feet away, and they made s'mores from 10 feet away, and they each had a separate pizza from 10 feet away. And, you know, they were in the backyard and they both got into their separate tents and unzipped and talked until they fell asleep and zipped up and went to bed. And that was the new version of the overnight. So that same flexibility in play, I would say we should just try to be creative as parents and coming up with as many ways to let our kids find ways to play, because they're hard to find right now. So Jen, anything else with you or Anna? Are there questions that we want to open up for the whole group? We're open to that.
Jen, did you have anything final you want?
I don't have anything else. No. Well, I will say one of the things that I did want to say with rankings that maybe I should go back to for a second is, alongside that, I think it's important when we are helping our kids to determine the right fit schools that we watch our own messaging, right? As parents, we might have biases about certain name brand schools that we've heard over the years, and we may pass on those biases to our kids. We may also pass on biases about schools that we've never heard of before. And so I think it's really important that we watch what we're saying, overall, but also particularly when it's in front of our kids, because even though we think that they're not listening or maybe it doesn't affect them, it certainly does. And so I think that's another kind of hint that I would love to leave parents with as they navigate finding right fit schools.
All right, so we are going to open it up to Q&A for all of the authors. So again, attendees, there's a Q&A box, and if you can't find the Q&A box for whatever reason, you can type in the chat. I'm keeping an eye on that also. I know the screen looks different for everyone depending what kind of device you are using. So on a laptop, on the bar on the bottom, there's an option to get into the Q&A box, but beyond that, I'm actually not sure. I've always used a laptop for these. So if you can't find the Q&A box, please feel free to use the chat. I'm keeping an eye on both.
You know, it's interesting as we listening to everyone and reflecting on listening to myself, it's so interesting that the theme for all of our writing and inspiration is about like us checking ourselves as parents and being the role models. And I think like it's just such an important message that when we feel so out of control with the world right now, ironically, all of our messages are owning our own stuff. You know, like, you know, showing play, owning our biases, looking at the places, the regrets we may have had for our own college experience or the emotions we're feeling. It's kind of cool. Like, you know, pay attention to those emotions. It's just a neat kind of theme. So well done, Anna, choosing us all.
Oddly enough, Check Yourself, or Parents Check Yourselves, was a title that we explored.
Love it. I love it.
Yeah.
Isn't that's amazing? Because it speaks so much to, I don't know if there are any questions, it speaks so much to like where I am in our family with fraternal twin girls, both going to college with, you know, or not. And they're just so different. And it's really, we've really had to pivot and had a lot of conversations like, where do you want to go? Where are you most comfortable? Help me to understand what's the appeal there. What, you know, how will you feel being on a different time zone? You know what I mean? Like all these questions that, you know, I know Cindy and Pam, you've been through this before, but it's so important what you were saying, Jen, just to own your own biases and not use this as a time to relive something that you missed out on, or to judge something because you may not like the brand name of it. I mean, you know, our message to our daughters has always been, you know, you need to go someplace where you're going to thrive emotionally, socially, academically, you know, and so someone may be more specific with her major and our other daughter is more liberal right now, and you can't compare them.
Well, there needs to be, you know, a hard self-reflection, and that title, Parent Check Yourself or Parents Behave, we're afraid a parent might not want to carry that book around to the beach. So we had to let that one go. But the first two chapters of our book, will really appeal to you, especially Claire and your audience, because it really forces parents. We have questionnaires and we have this really deep dive where parents have to first kind of come to terms with themselves and fixing themselves before they can parent well. And that includes, you know, looking at you and your partner or your spouses, or if you're a single parent, what all your biases are, what your education background was, what you had wanted for yourself that you either achieved or didn't achieve, whether you went far away or stayed home, were there financial issues with it? You know, all these questions that you need to kind of ask yourself before you can then turn to your teen, who, as you know, with 4 kids, or 1 kid or 2 kids, they're all different, even when they're twins. So just knowing that in communicating to them, you've already kind of pulled yourself as much as you can out of the equation and put the focus on them and what it is they think they want. Those are great questions that you're asking already, Claire. So you're going to be just fine. And so
thank you. I appreciate that, because we're also talking about, you know, like stay closer or gap years. And it's just about, I love what you said about your son, just being okay with the choices. These are extraordinary times, and it's so important not to judge ourselves, but to be curious about what's motivating our thoughts and behaviors.
We do have a question from the audience for Jen and Cindy. It says, how do you deal with disappointing college acceptance results with your teens?
That's a good one.
I'm happy to talk about it, or you can too. It's up to you.
We'll each give one sound bite so that everyone gets a chance to ask a question. That's okay.
So the reality is failure is an inevitable part of this process. And I think one of the things that I tend to see is that families come into it with these hopes. And sure, it's great to have hopes. I'm certainly not saying that. But they never address the fact that they're almost too afraid to talk about the fact that the disappointment that may happen ahead. And so my suggestion is to actually talk about it before applications. Chat about the fact that there will be setbacks, there will be disappointments, but that we will walk through it together. And I also think one thing that I've noticed over the years is that when kids will email me some admissions decisions, they'll say, I was rejected from blah, blah, blah. I was rejected for blah, blah, blah. And to me, that word reject it pierces my ear or my eyes, I guess, because it's via email. And it makes me so sad, because actually no part of an admissions decision says we are rejecting you. But that has become a part of the vernacular. And I think that I would like to see a change in the way that kids even, refer to those admissions decisions. I wasn't accepted to, because when they use the word reject, I think they sort of correlate it with their identity, which I think is a real travesty, and something that we as parents can help them through.
Yeah, I would add to that 2 things that are short. One is just that the way not to behave when your child is admitted to their dream school or not their dream school is to not post it all over social media. Okay.
Thank you.
We've arrived at a time where kids are sitting in front of their computer being videotaped live feed. And I think we see only the celebrations or a few ending in a celebration. And the reality is the system isn't created to have you get into every single school. It's just, it rarely happens. But posting it on social media just seems to be the best people to tell your admissions decisions to are your parents and your grandparents. They have full skin in the game. They love you no matter what, and they're not comparing you to anyone else. And they celebrate in your joys, and they feel your pain when you have your pain. But in terms of, broadcasting this in a live manner, it's one of the worst things about technology. We know of families that are kind of shunned from their communities or their schools for broadcasting in a way, and it's just missing like a sensitivity chip now in the way that we are living our lives in a, you know, in a very socially connected way through technology. So I would say that, and then I, you know, just agree. It's preparing for, it's not so much preparing for the failure of it that's built into the system. I think it's just the disappointment. It's a disappointment to not get what you had hoped for and worked hard for, but there's so many elements outside of the student's control. I always say there's so many things that are out of your control. How many kids from your school apply that year, how many tuba players there are, how many of, you know, all these different aspects that go into the admissions decision. But what is in your control is being who you are authentically, creating a college application that reflects your voice and who you are, sharing, you know, personally who you are, having teachers write things about you and what they observe in the classroom, and just doing your best of wherever you are and how capable you are. So that's how I would say.
I would, if I could add one thing too, based on my own experience, you know, as you're building the list of places that you're going to apply, try not to have one, it's got to be that one or nothing. You know, if you're, there's so many schools that will be a great fit for your child. So as you go through that process, you know, front load them with the information. This would be great because, and that would be great because, and this one would give you money. And so that everyone is like a bunch of different happy choices. Obviously, they're going to have a favorite, but sometimes they get into their favorite and the other one gives them more money. And guess what? That one becomes the favorite. So things change. And I think it's really important to, you know, like prepare them for all the different things and have a lot of choices so that it doesn't come down to, oh God, it was that one and I didn't get it.
Okay. And so all of your books kind of touched on, you all sort of talked about either unstructured time or downtime or taking a break. And I know, Pam, you had mentioned that your family actually kind of thrived in that. But not all families do. Do you feel like it's important for families, all of you? Do you feel like it's important for families to have that unstructured time, even if that doesn't seem like it's what works best for your individual family?
Well, I think it's about, like, we're forced, right? Like, we are the play piece, the downtime, the unstructured time is layered with a loss. So I don't know if it really is, it's hard to feel playful in moments of stress. So I think that's the big current here, is that, you know, I agree with, you know, Pam, you know, your book, that I think kids are so overstructured and don't have enough time to relax that then what happens is they're always looking to mom and dad or structured activity for their boredom. And if we look at like how we structure our time as just a life skill. So right now, what is play going to look like during COVID? What is play for your kids? How are you going to find playful things for yourself, or, you know, restore your own energy during COVID as a parent when you're never alone from your kids, really, for many people who are at home. So I think it's like understanding that it's the unstructured time that we're dealing with now is layered with so much loss and such a loss of stability, a loss of relationships, a loss of our personal safety. You know, there's a lot of worries there. There's a lot of instability. And, you know, even today on this walk, when I went with some of my girlfriends and their kids, we ran into a track coach for the high school, and he's like, oh, give it to November. And, you know, he's like, I don't know. And in my mind, I'm like, oh my gosh, they just went back to school. I'm just trying to breathe into that for 2 days a week. Oh. And so I can't even think of November. So I just think it's important just to take it day by day. And I love that example of like, what are you doing productive? What are you doing to rest? And what are you doing to play? And just keep it in those 3 simple buckets. I can't remember, Cindy, how you framed it.
Playtime, downtime, and family time. And the downtime is different than the playtime, because the downtime is
the downtime is restorative.
Yeah.
It's restorative. And I think it's going to look different for everyone. And I think, you know, even if your kids, you know, there's a research shows that when kids are bored and they don't have other activities to choose from, they will immediately say, I want to go on the electronics. I want to be on the screen. I want to do a video game. So if you can even teach your kids to just self-select an activity to get to know themselves, to play that may not have to do with more screen time, they may build their repertoire of activities. And parents too. I mean, I own it. There are times where I'm like, guys, I am making this video or posting some things or scrolling because I have no bandwidth to do something fun. Like, I'm that depleted. So, you know, there are days, and I own it. I will be the most transparent person, and I will say that to my girls. Mommy is so exhausted. Like, it's like a 16-hour day. I know what I should do, but I can barely move, right? So give myself grace and compassion instead of judgment that day. And then tomorrow we'll go for a walk, you know?
Yeah, it is amazing the things they will come up with on their own. You know, when you hear the words "I'm bored" and then you don't have a way to entertain them, you know, houses get messy, forts get built, backyards get destroyed, you know, and kids come up with ways to fill their time, and it's pretty inventive. So
Yeah.
you know, they will find a way to employ themselves or to volunteer virtually or to do something to kind of fill that empty time. And I laugh now thinking of how many hours we spend under our roofs at home and how full the day is still seen, even though we're not out circulating in the world doing all the things we were doing before. It's very strange how the time gets filled. So.
And the one thing I also think is so important too is that when you're in survival mode as a parent, it's not the time to add more stress to your life by being self-critical. So I would just encourage parents just to be kind to themselves right now, because I think you're holding a lot. And I think, you know, I use this metaphor in therapy a lot with clients. I said, you don't really understand how stressful it is swimming in the ocean when you have sharks around you until you get to the shore. And it's when you get to the shore that second wave of stress hits you, because now you're safe. And so I think a lot of us parents and individuals just collectively, you know, we're living at these hyper levels of stress hormones. And I think it's not the time to be more critical, you know, to ourselves.
I know in our
I,
home,
I wrote that down, by the way. That's what I'm doing. I'm writing down your advice. Be kind to myself. I need to do that.
And when you get to the shore, burst into tears because
Oh yes, burst into tears. Like, and that's the thing too. It's like that, and that's okay, because maybe you needed that stress relief, right? Like, that's okay. I think after any big event, didn't you feel a little let down, you know, and you do feel drained? And I mean, yeah, just the grace and compassion, I think.
I know in my house, we have started mommy timeouts because that is the level my 3-year-old can understand, where we talked a little bit about bedtime earlier, and that because it's the end of my day, because everything is weird right now. By bedtime, I'm already just kind of like done with the day, and the toddler is at a very difficult bedtime age. And so I just do tend to get really frustrated. And what we've learned to do with it, we don't do traditional timeouts in my house. We don't use it as punishment. When he gets frantically upset, he gets a timeout where he sits on his bed and takes time to calm himself down, and it's been amazing. I know that doesn't work for all children, but it's worked really well with him. So what I started doing is when we get to that place where I feel like I might start yelling and I know he just doesn't want to go to sleep because he wants a little more time with mom, I'll just go, mommy needs a timeout, and I'll take a couple of minutes and go out and have that downtime for myself. And because we use that system for him to calm himself down, he knows exactly what it means, and he leaves me alone. And I get those couple of minutes, and that has been a lifesaver through all this, because I've been working outside the home for a while now, but we were working the bookstore from home, which was a whole confusing process. But for 3.5 weeks of a total shutdown in Houston, and that was the hardest because there was no break from the family at all. It was working and child rearing and cleaning up the house and being confronted with all the things I hadn't gotten done today all the time.
it's much easier to leave home, huh?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
easy. But I think that's so beautiful what you did, because you allowed yourself to have a feeling, what we call self-regulate, fancy word for knowing paying attention to what's going on. And you were able to respond in a way that didn't reject or scare or inflate the moment. Because that's why I say to parents all the time, if you can, it's a practice. You're not going to be perfect. No one's perfect at this. I mean, every parent yells at their kids. I'm just going to put it out there. And if they say they don't, they're not telling you the truth. We all lose it. But if we learn from those moments we lose it, then we can actually teach our kids to help regulate their emotions. And I think you did a beautiful job of that. And just keep doing that, because you're doing the emotional work somewhere. Because I think it would have been harder if you would have snapped, because I've been there, snapped, and then you feel guilty later.
Well, I was going to say, Anna, I know you have an older one as well, but as you might know, as they get older, you start going to sleep before they do. So that's, they tuck you in or they don't. You just have to hope they're going to wake up the next day for school. And I will say the one thing about at-home schooling that's changed my life is there is nobody to wake up and get out the door and rush and have that morning craziness. My kids know the kitchen's right downstairs and they need to grab a bagel or a toast of frozen waffle or make a smoothie or grab a pre-made smoothie, whatever they want, bring it back up to their desk and get started. And guess who's getting a little more sleep in the mornings? So when school goes back and I have to be the driver again, that's going to be a rude wake up call for me.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
Anyway, this has been such a great group of people to share the time with. And I value the things I've learned from you, Pam, and from you, Claire. And I'm always learning from Jenn every day. We're, in contact sharing all of that. But we definitely hope we've helped some parents out there, and we'll continue to when they have the opportunity, hopefully, to dive into each of our books. I know I'm looking forward to spending more time with both of your books as well. But this has been a lot of fun, and we appreciate Katie Books for having us.
Thank you, ladies, so much for coming this evening and for going over a little late with us. Sorry about that. We appreciate it so much. And we do have attendees, all 3 of these books currently in store, ready to ship out or for you to come pick up in store if you're local. And there's a link in the chat box, or there was one in the email confirmation you got where you can look at all of the titles all together. So thank you, ladies, so much for doing this. I have learned a lot, even though I'd already read your books. I feel like this conversation was so great, and I appreciate it so much.
Thank you all.
It was really great to be here.
And thank you for showing us what our books look like in the bookstores.
Oh my gosh.
We haven't had
we can't see anything right now.
We just have them on the shelves behind us. So
yeah,
it's nice to know that they're getting some love out in the real world.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you all so much. This was wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Everyone.
Thank you, Anna.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.